Lately I've had Barry Gibb on my mind. I really like him. And you know, Michael and I, we were in love, and there's nothing anyone can do about that, nothing more to say." Diana Ross's voice was soft but firm. Then it hardened. "You can take this from me. I will not let you insult Michael. He is my friend. I love him. And I don't like people making fun of him. People say Michael Jackson died because a doctor made a deadly mistake. But Diana Ross has long implied that story is incomplete, because according to what she shared in private, in the final days before his last breath, Michael leaned in close and murmured 5 names to her. 5 powerful black music icons he believed were tied to the pressure, betrayal, and fear that dragged him toward the edge. These weren't outsiders. They were legends. People he'd recorded with, toured with, trusted. People who, some believed, stood to gain everything the moment he was gone. And while the world watched his body being rushed into an ambulance on that June morning, those 5 names were already being spoken in low, measured voices behind locked doors in Beverly Hills. Spoken by the one woman Michael trusted, enough to name as guardian of his children if anything ever happened to him. Diana didn't take the stage at the memorial. She didn't sit on talk shows. She didn't pick up every call from the Jackson family. Instead, she released only one haunting line to the world. "Michael warned me about them. Tonight, we open the sealed drawer of those whispers and step into the secret files surrounding the 5 stars Diana Ross was said to believe were connected, directly or indirectly, to the chain of events that ended with Michael Jackson's death." 1. Quincy Jones, the architect who carried his secrets. On the day Michael Jackson died, while fans screamed and news anchors stumbled through breaking updates, Quincy Jones reportedly stood in his Bel Air home staring at the television screen. According to one account, he spoke quietly, almost to himself. "I knew something like this would happen." It didn't sound like shock. It didn't sound like raw grief. It sounded like the kind of sentence you say only when you've watched a disaster forming on the horizon long before anyone else saw the clouds. Because Quincy wasn't just Michael's producer. He was the architect of his sound, the mentor who pushed him, questioned him, sharpened him, and, in the end, became the one figure Michael seemed unable to fully escape. Their story stretched back decades, to the 5th of August 1982, inside Westlake Studio in Los Angeles. The air buzzed with electricity, cables warming under the lights, tape reels spinning in endless loops. Michael, just 23 years old, stepped up to the microphone and recorded take after take of Billie Jean, while Quincy listened from behind the glass, eyes locked in. That night wasn't only about chasing perfection. It was the moment Quincy understood that the kid he'd once known at Motown had become something else entirely, a force of nature no mentor could fully contain. As Michael's fame shot into the stratosphere, the tension between them quietly rose with it. By the Bad Tour in 1987, that pressure started slipping through the cracks in small, unnerving ways. Backstage in Yokohama, someone casually mentioned Quincy's name in conversation. Witnesses later claimed Michael froze mid-step. His shoulders went rigid, his breath caught, his hands began to tremble. Crew members wrote that he reacted as if something dangerous had suddenly stepped into the room. Michael didn't offer an explanation. He simply leaned in and whispered, "Don't say his name," before walking away. No one challenged him. In Michael's world, fear was never random. It was a signal, a flare pointing toward something deeper, something he wasn't ready to say out loud. That unspoken fear finally broke into words on a rainy night, the 19th of February, 1990. Michael arrived at Diana Ross's house after 10 p.m., his jacket damp from the weather, his voice unsteady around the edges. When she asked what was wrong, he moved closer and lowered his voice. "Quincy knows things that can destroy me." He refused to explain. He only repeated that it had to do with the music, the contracts, the people behind it all, the ones no one ever saw on stage. Then, sometime after 1 a.m., he left as suddenly as he had come, leaving Diana alone in the quiet, shaken, and silent, with a confession that felt less like gossip and more like a warning. The decade that followed began to fill in the shadows he wouldn't name. During Michael's public battles from the 1,993 accusations to his war with Sony in 2002 to the 2005 trial, speculation multiplied. It was rumored that Quincy maintained alliances with executives who had their eyes on Michael's catalog and that he had grown resentful after being pushed aside on Dangerous, His Story, and Invincible. According to a former Sony employee, Quincy seemed to know every strategic move being made behind closed doors. The implication, whispered through industry back channels, was that he wasn't just a detached observer. He was a man with connections threaded deep into the same machinery Michael believed was trying to control him. Whether any of those whispers were completely true mattered less than their effect on Michael. His hands shook, his voice cracked. He insisted that certain names, Quincy's among them, should not be spoken around him at all. Then came the 1st of June, 2009, just 3 weeks before Michael died. Quincy sat for an interview in New York and, with steady calm, said, "Michael stole a lot of stuff. He wasn't the person people think he is." The words cut deeper than any tabloid headline. They came from the man who had once called Michael his musical son. That evening, during This Is It rehearsals, Michael sat off to the side, alone in a corner, staring at the floor while his hands shook uncontrollably. One dancer later recalled that when Quincy's name came up, Michael whispered, almost pleading, "Don't bring him up again." What happened between them that left a wound so deep? Quincy has never fully explained. Instead, 9 years after Michael's death, in a 2018 interview, he went even further, claiming Michael had been greedy, dishonest, and hiding dark secrets. The tone wasn't nostalgic. It wasn't sorrowful. It sounded like a man finishing a conversation the other person was no longer alive to answer. Fans were outraged. Members of the Jackson family were said to be furious. But for those who remembered Michael's visible panic whenever Quincy's name surfaced, there was something else. A chill that felt like confirmation that whatever history lay between them was heavier and darker than the public would ever be allowed to see. No one knows whether Quincy was trying to protect Michael, condemn him, or quietly settle a score. Only the two of them understood. No one outside their inner circle knows exactly what secrets Michael believed Quincy held. But the fear was real. The tremors in his hands were real. The night he unburdened himself to Diana Ross was real. And when Diana reportedly whispered at the Staples Center about 5 names Michael had warned her about before he died, many listeners thought of the same first name. Quincy Jones, the architect of Michael's greatest triumphs, and the man whose shadow Michael Jackson seemed to spend the rest of his life trying to outrun. 2. Tommy Mottola, the former Sony kingpin Michael feared. When Michael Jackson stood on a Harlem stage on the 9th of July 2002, gripping the microphone with trembling hands and calling Tommy Mottola a devil, a racist, a dangerous man, the industry shrugged it off. Executives rolled their eyes. Commentators said fame had finally broken him. They treated his words like the outburst of a fading star, not a warning. But the people closest to Michael insisted his fear wasn't theatrics. It was real, immediate, and rooted in something that had been tightening around him for more than a decade. Because to Michael, Tommy wasn't just another music executive. He was the gatekeeper of Sony's empire, the man at the top of the most powerful label in the world, with influence that, according to insiders, reached far beyond chart positions and album budgets. It all started with the catalog. In 1985, Michael shocked the world by purchasing the ATV publishing catalog, the treasure chest that included the Beatles' entire composition library. At the time, it was valued at roughly $47.5 million. By the early 2000s, that number had reportedly swelled into the hundreds of millions, possibly even into the billions. And there was one company with the money, the reach, and the motive to challenge his control: Sony. Suddenly, the crown jewel of global music publishing was held by a black artist who refused to be a corporate puppet. And standing between Sony and that catalog, right at the center of the power grid, was Tommy Mottola, running Sony's music division. The balance of power shifted, and Michael, by his own account, felt that shift like a rope slowly tightening around his neck. The tension didn't explode into public view until the Invincible era, between 2001 and 2003, when Michael's relationship with Sony turned openly hostile. Promotion was reportedly cut back. Budgets were slashed. Meetings grew combative. Michael publicly claimed that Sony was sabotaging him. Tommy denied it. Then whispers began to move quietly through the industry. Rumors circulated that Sony executives were drawing up contingency plans involving the ATV catalog if Michael's debts became unmanageable. When those whispers reached Michael, he was said to be furious. He told confidants that Sony wanted to push him into financial collapse. A former Sony staffer later leaked that Tommy knew every internal strategy and every pressure point connected to Michael, suggesting these conflicts weren't just routine business disagreements. In the minds of some insiders, they looked more like a slow, strategic dismantling. Mariah Carey's story darkened the picture even further. As Tommy's ex-wife, she publicly accused him of surveillance, manipulation, and controlling every inch of her career, a golden cage built from contracts, fear, and absolute dominance. If he could allegedly do that to Mariah Carey, one of the most successful singers in the world, people quietly asked, what could he do to Michael Jackson? Within Black Hollywood, a pattern was said to be obvious. Tommy wasn't just powerful, he was the kind of powerful that moved in the shadows, where careers could be made or erased with a single phone call that left no fingerprints. This is why Diana Ross's private confession carries such a heavy weight. In conversations far from cameras and microphones, she admitted that Michael spoke about Tommy with a kind of fear she rarely saw in him, a fear that felt raw, not theatrical. Members of her family later recalled Michael visiting her home exhausted and anxious, whispering about people who wanted the catalog. He never said Tommy's name out loud in front of them. He didn't need to. The way he spoke, the way he looked over his shoulder, said it for him. By April 2009, during This Is It rehearsals, that fear appeared to reach its breaking point. Kenny Ortega, the tour director, received an email later used in court, documenting a sentence Michael repeated, "If they can't control me, they will try to end me." Dancers remembered how Michael's voice would drop whenever conversations drifted toward corporate pressure or Sony negotiations. He avoided naming certain people. Each time the topic came close, he literally glanced over his shoulder as if expecting someone to be listening in from the shadows. Then came the 25th of June, 2009, the day Michael Jackson died. The world reacted with instant shock, grief spilling across television screens and city streets. But behind that public heartbreak, another story was unfolding with stunning speed. Sony's stock rose. The value of the ATV catalog spiked. Sales of Michael's music skyrocketed. Within months, Sony reportedly generated more than $1.5 billion from projects and deals tied directly to his death. The very catalog Michael had fought to keep. The same catalog he believed people wanted to pry from his hands. Suddenly, after years of conflict, that catalog became Sony's biggest posthumous gold mine. For many fans and some insiders, this felt like the final piece of a pattern they could no longer ignore. The timing, the money, the words Michael spoke before he died. Together, they formed a picture that, for those believers, was too precise to dismiss as coincidence. Black entertainers began whispering the same questions in private. Why did Michael attack Tommy so openly in 2002? Why did he risk his reputation, his deals, his safety to call a top executive the devil on stage? Why didn't he use careful, sanitized industry language? Why did he choose words like racist and dangerous man? Because, according to those who knew him, Michael didn't see it as business anymore. He saw it as survival. Even years later, the rumors refused to fade. The narrative kept circling back to the same conclusion. Tommy Mottola was the executive standing between Sony and the Beatles catalog. Michael believed Sony wanted full control of it, and when he died, Sony ultimately gained everything it needed from that empire. This is why, when people heard that Diana Ross had spoken of 5 names Michael warned her about, Tommy Mottola's name jumped near the top of many lists. Not because of superstition, not because of wild conspiracy boards on the internet, but because, to those who believed it, the money trail, the fear, the late-night conversations, the timeline, and the aftermath all seemed to point toward a quiet war Michael had been fighting mostly alone. And in that war, Tommy Mottola was not just an executive in a suit. In Michael's mind, he was the power broker who, if he chose to, could end him. 3. Jermaine Jackson, the brother with a darker agenda. The moment the investigation began drifting away from doctors and prescriptions and started pointing outward toward record labels, executives, and corporate handlers, the story took a darker, more uncomfortable turn. Because the truth is, not all of the shadows around Michael Jackson came from the industry. Some of them, according to long-standing whispers, came from inside his own house. And one name keeps echoing through fan theories, leaked accounts, and quiet Hollywood conversations, the name of someone who, in a different world, might have been his greatest protector. Jermaine Jackson. For decades, the public image was simple. Jermaine was the calm, articulate older brother, the polished one, the handsome Jackson with the camera-ready smile, the member of the Jackson Five who seemed to understand fame, contracts, and interviews better than the rest. But behind that polished image lay a trail of contradictions, tensions, and uneasy choices that never fully added up unless you looked at them from a harsher angle, the angle very few people wanted to confront. An angle that suggested not just sibling rivalry, but competition, and maybe something more dangerous. The story always returns to one sentence Jermaine delivered to the press in 2009, a sentence fans still repeat with a chill. Michael should have died in 1984. He said it calmly, referring to the Pepsi commercial accident, as if he were analyzing an alternate timeline. But the phrasing felt cold, strangely detached, almost like a verdict spoken long after the jury had gone home. Fans never forgot it. Brothers mourn. Brothers break down. Brothers do not casually rewrite the year you should have died. And yet, Jermaine had a history of crossing lines that left Michael feeling exposed. Back in 2005, when Michael was drowning in legal fees after his trial, Jermaine reportedly signed a contract to book shows using Michael's name without Michael's direct approval. Jermaine later said it was an attempt to rescue the family financially. But when the deal surfaced, it ignited a scandal that tore through the already fragile bond between them. According to those around him, Michael felt exploited, used, betrayed. For the first time in his adult life, he cut Jermaine off for months. He told people close to him that Jermaine saw Michael Jackson as a brand first and a brother second. Rumors followed and never really stopped. When Jermaine published his memoir years later, he wrote that he wished Michael had returned to Islam, hinting at a spiritual conflict inside the family. Some fans interpreted this as pressure, influence, or an attempt to frame Michael's story through Jermaine's own beliefs. Other quiet reports circulated in Black Hollywood that Jermaine was positioning himself to play a larger role in Michael's estate, that he wanted authority, decision-making, power, perhaps even control of assets. Some believed he resented that Michael, not he, had become the global icon, the face of the family name. But nothing compares to what happened on the 25th of June, 2009. Before UCLA officially confirmed Michael's death, before doctors stepped up to the podium, before any hospital spokesperson made a statement, Jermaine Jackson walked out to the cameras and told the world that his brother was gone. He announced Michael's death before the hospital did. How did he know? Who told him? How was he prepared so quickly, so visibly, so calmly? The questions spread almost instantly among fans and observers. But no one pressed him at that moment. The world was in shock. No one wanted to interrogate a grieving brother on live television. In the years that followed, however, additional details emerged that made that moment feel even harder to ignore. A former security guard who worked at Carrollwood Drive, the home where Michael spent his final night, later claimed something unsettling. According to his account, Jermaine arrived at the house before the police did, at least 20 minutes before. The guard said Jermaine walked straight past him. He didn't bombard them with questions. He didn't look dazed or confused. He moved with purpose, as though he already had some idea of what had happened inside. The official timeline never clearly explained this. Jermaine never offered a detailed public answer. The family largely avoided the topic. To those paying close attention, that silence began to sound louder than any denial. And then there was Diana Ross, the one woman Michael trusted enough to name in his will, the woman who understood the Jackson family's fractures better than almost anyone on the outside. According to a close acquaintance, Diana once said quietly, "Between Michael and Jermaine, there was always a war I never understood. A war, not jealousy, not simple rivalry, A war. What kind of war exists between two brothers who spent their childhood sharing stages, songs, and the same tiny dressing rooms? Many believe the roots go all the way back to the earliest days before the big houses, before the solo careers, before the global hysteria. Back when the Jackson 5 were just emerging and Jermaine was supposed to be the star. Back when Michael's voice eclipsed his. Back when Motown executives picked Michael as the one the world would hear first. Jermaine never publicly admitted resentment. He didn't have to. His decisions, some say, spoke louder. When he stayed with Motown, while the rest of the brothers followed Michael to CBS Records, the industry framed it as a simple business choice. But insiders claim it was something else, a fracture so deep that the two brothers never truly healed it. Even when they smiled together on television, even when they performed side by side, that tension hummed underneath the music like a low, constant frequency. Michael once confided to someone close, "Jermaine wants to lead, but I was never meant to follow him." By the time Michael entered his final years, their relationship had reportedly become a pattern of uneasy truces, brief reconciliations, and long stretches of cold distance. Jermaine spoke for the Jackson family in interviews even when Michael didn't want him to. He negotiated opportunities using Michael's name because, in many rooms, people listened to him. And when Michael died, Jermaine stepped to the front. The cameras, the press releases, the family statements. Some said it was grief. Others believed it was something else. Control. Even inside the Jackson household, it was whispered that Jermaine wanted to guide the estate, shape the narrative, direct the legacy. But the executors named in Michael's will were not Jermaine. They were John Branca and John McClain. And the person Michael named as potential guardian of his children wasn't Jermaine either. It was Diana Ross. That omission reportedly stung the entire family. For Jermaine, observers believed, it cut deeper than anyone could see. He spoke often about what he would have done differently, what he should have been allowed to manage, how the estate had wronged the Jacksons. Some insiders felt this didn't sound like pure mourning. It sounded like ambition, wounded, frustrated, exposed. For fans tracing the timeline, the pattern is hard to look away from. The unsettling comment that Michael should have died in 1984. The controversial show contracts. The spiritual and public pressure. The financial disputes. The early arrival at Carolwood. The premature announcement of Michael's death. The lifelong struggle between two brothers, one forever in front of the spotlight, the other forever just behind it. Jermaine Jackson may never have consciously intended to harm his brother. But in the world of Black American fame, where legacy, money, and power can warp family bonds into something sharper, intentions matter far less than outcomes. And Jermaine's choices, according to those who study this story, left a visible trail, a trail leading many to believe he wasn't only the grieving brother at the microphone that night, but also the brother with a darker agenda, one Michael had been trying, in his own quiet way, to outrun for years. 4. LaToya Jackson, the sister who called it murder. The story of Michael Jackson's death has always existed on two tracks. The official timeline ends at UCLA Medical Center on the 25th of June, 2009. A cardiac arrest, a failed resuscitation, a global outpouring of grief. But there is another version, the shadow timeline, the one whispered in corridors, scribbled in private journals, and carried like a wound by the one sibling who refused to follow the family's script, LaToya Jackson. She didn't wait months. She didn't even wait weeks. Within days of Michael's death, LaToya stepped in front of cameras, eyes wide, expression unflinching, and spoke the words that detonated a million rumors and still echo years later. Michael was murdered. This was a conspiracy. While the rest of the family moved cautiously, weighing every sentence, LaToya did the opposite. She spoke freely. She said they. She said powerful people. She said what others only hinted at. She said the quiet part out loud. Why? The answer, according to those who have studied her journey, lies in a lifetime of fractures inside the industry, inside the family, and inside LaToya herself. Fractures that began long before Michael's final day. To understand the fury in her voice in 2009, you have to go back to 1993, to a hotel press conference in Tel Aviv. LaToya stood at a podium, hands trembling as she read from a sheet of paper. She accused her father, Joseph Jackson, of abusing her and her siblings. She claimed Michael was being used by powerful people, that the family had protected predators, and that she feared for her brother's life. The world dismissed her. The Jacksons publicly disowned her. Fans called her a traitor. Years later, as court documents and leaked notes revealed just how vulnerable Michael had been, those old clips of LaToya began to look different, not necessarily accurate in every detail, but eerily prophetic in tone. There was another layer to her story that made it even darker. Throughout the 1,990 seconds, LaToya lived under the control of her husband-manager, Jack Gordon, a man she later described as abusive and dangerous. She claimed he forced her into Playboy shoots, tabloid deals, and sensational interviews. According to LaToya, he threatened to kill her if she refused to read accusations against her own family. That experience shaped her instincts like a blade. It taught her one lesson she repeated in various forms for the rest of her life. In this business, nothing happens by accident. Everything in this industry is controlled by somebody, she was known to say. So, when Michael died in 2009, LaToya did not behave like someone seeing this pattern for the first time. She behaved like someone who believed she had seen it before. The day after Michael's death, the 26th of June, 2009, around midday, LaToya arrived at Michael's Carrollwood Drive mansion. Security footage was said to show her wearing dark glasses and a light-colored coat, walking through a side entrance with two men carrying collapsible bags. A bodyguard later claimed anonymously that LaToya stayed inside for nearly 5 hours, moving through Michael's bedroom, office, and library. When she left, he said, she carried 9 bags. 9. Asked what was inside, he reportedly answered in a low voice, documents, lots of them, papers, journals, envelopes, drives, even cassettes. He said the bags were zipped shut and sealed with duct tape. But the detail that unsettled fans the most came from a second account, a housekeeper who told a reporter years later that LaToya's team removed a locked wooden box from Michael's closet. According to her, the box held handwritten letters, contracts, lists of debts, lists of enemies, and something she described only as messages to Miss Ross. Many fans believe Miss Ross meant Diana Ross, the woman Michael named as a potential guardian for his children. If that interpretation is correct, those letters may have contained private warnings, confessions, or secrets meant only for her things. Michael never wanted to see the light of day. That is why a quiet comment Diana later made behind closed doors chills everyone who hears it. When asked what she thought about LaToya's behavior after Michael died, she reportedly sighed and said, LaToya knows things Michael never wanted anyone to reveal. She didn't explain. She didn't defend. She didn't accuse. She simply acknowledged that LaToya had taken something from that house, or many things, and that what she took mattered. No one outside that circle has ever fully identified what was in those 9 bags. That absence, that silence, has become one of the most haunting gaps in the Michael Jackson timeline. The more closely you examine LaToya's steps after his death, the stranger they appear. On the afternoon of June 26, only hours after leaving Carrollwood Drive, she met with detectives. According to accounts of that meeting, she told them she believed Michael had been surrounded by people who wanted to kill him. She said he was controlled, manipulated, drained financially. She said Michael had told her he was afraid of some of the people around him. At one point, she reportedly described him as a prisoner in his own life. She didn't frame what happened as negligence. She used another word, responsibility. And then she added something that appears in police notes and later summaries. LaToya said she believed Michael had been targeted for years. In the weeks that followed, her public statements sounded like fragments of a larger story she never fully told. She said Michael was worth more dead than alive. She said people had pushed him into debt. She claimed he was forced into contracts he didn't want to sign. She hinted that the same forces controlled his final rehearsals. She suggested that someone close to him wanted access to his assets. She didn't name those people on camera, but in private, across small circles in Los Angeles, she spoke of industry figures, executives, relatives, managers, and trusted confidants who, in her view, had betrayed him. Fans began connecting dots, asking their own questions. Was she referring to Sony, to AEG, to certain family members, to a web of all of them? Or was she, as some believed, mixing truth with her own trauma? Because LaToya, for all her accusations, was not a clean witness. She had spent years signing contracts to reveal Michael's secrets, selling exclusives to tabloids, and participating in media deals that capitalized on his pain. Many fans felt deeply betrayed by her. Michael himself once said, according to those close to him, that LaToya was being used by people who wanted to hurt him and that she no longer knew who she was. After leaving Jack Gordon, LaToya claimed she had been manipulated into attacking Michael and her family. She said she regretted it. But the damage was done, and the public's trust in her never fully recovered. That's why, in 2009, her declarations were met with suspicion. Was this justice? Revenge? Opportunism? A mixture of all three? And yet, as more details trickled out over the years, certain facts kept pulling people back toward her version of events. She was among the first at the house. She removed materials no one else touched. She used the word murder when nearly everyone else said tragedy. She said conspiracy before the media even understood the basic medical narrative. She never softened those words. She repeated them. In one interview, she described Michael's final months like this. He was surrounded by vultures. He knew it. I knew it. It didn't sound like grief. It sounded like certainty. Over time, more witnesses quietly echoed pieces of what she said. Security guards who claimed Michael was terrified of certain people, doctors who thought he was too stressed and fragile to perform, dancers who remembered his paranoia about contracts and rehearsals. Still, LaToya remains the only Jackson sibling who publicly and consistently used the word murder to describe what happened to her brother. She never walked it back. She never called it a misunderstanding. She never called it an accident. But the real reason her name remains written into this story isn't just the accusations. It's the image of those 9 bags leaving Carrollwood Drive. Bags that have never surfaced. Bags many believe hold the versions of events Michael never got to share. Himself diaries, warnings, legal drafts, private letters, or even evidence of the people he feared most. Whether LaToya protected those secrets or buried them is a question no one has answered. What is certain is this. LaToya Jackson didn't just lose a brother. She became, by choice or by circumstance, the keeper of something darker, the keeper of the fragments Michael left behind in the house, where his voice finally went silent. In the story of Michael Jackson's last hours, LaToya is not only the sister who called it murder. She is the sister who walked out of that house carrying the closest thing anyone may ever have to his unfiltered truth. 5. Berry Gordy, the godfather who built him and may have broken him. There is a kind of power in the music industry that doesn't just come from chart positions or money. It comes from the ability to shape a life before it has even begun. For Michael Jackson, that power had a name he could never fully escape: Berry Gordy. The man who found him, polished him, disciplined him, designed him, and, in ways only a few people hinted at, quietly haunted him. Their story started long before the scandals, before the courtroom battles, before the catalog wars. It began in July 1968, inside a Motown audition room in Detroit. An 11-year-old Michael Jackson stood under the hot lights, sweat slipping down his temples as he sang "Who's Lovin' You" with the voice of a grown man, trapped inside a child's body. Berry Gordy listened. He didn't grin. He didn't clap. According to those who were there, he simply gave a small nod, a silent verdict that would change music history. Sign them. In that moment, Michael Jackson became spiritually, professionally, and emotionally tied to Motown. People like to describe Motown as a dream factory. For Michael, it was a factory with rules sharp as razors. Berry controlled everything: how the Jackson 5 dressed, how they moved, how they spoke, even how they seemed to breathe in interviews. Vocal coaches, choreographers, etiquette teachers, PR handlers, all were assigned to sculpt the perfect, accessible, black entertainers. Michael would later tell Oprah in 1993, "I never had a childhood. I rehearsed every day, sometimes until 3 in the morning." What he did not say publicly, at least not directly, was who first placed that weight on his shoulders. That is where the shadows begin. By the time Michael reached his teenage years, quiet tensions had already formed. They didn't explode on camera. They hummed underneath everything. Jermaine married Berry Gordy's daughter, Hazel, tying the families together in a way that looked glamorous on the surface, but created a complicated loyalty loop behind the scenes. Berry gained leverage. Jermaine landed in the middle, torn between allegiance to Motown and loyalty to his younger brother. Michael saw it. He felt it. He never forgot. When the Jackson brothers finally left Motown for CBS Records in 1975, it wasn't just a contract shift. For Michael, it was an escape. But powerful men rarely let go of what they once molded without a trace of resentment. Berry Gordy did not forget either. Fast forward to the 25th of March 1983. Motown 25. Yesterday, today, forever. The night Michael moonwalked into myth. On stage, it looked like pure triumph. Backstage, according to some dancers, it felt more complicated. Several performers later said that Michael cried in the dressing room before going on, not from nerves, but from what one dancer described as pressure from the old Motown people. It was said that Berry stopped by and delivered a speech that felt less like encouragement and more like a command. Show them who you are. Show them you belong to this legacy. Michael reportedly nodded. But once Berry left, his hands shook. This didn't feel like a reunion. It felt like an inspection. The years rolled on, and Michael's empire grew far beyond Motown's reach. Thriller shattered records, Bad rewired pop music. Dangerous locked in his status as an untouchable cultural giant. With every success, Berry Gordy's visible presence in Michael's life faded further into the background. Some observers believed he didn't take that quietly. Rumors in fan circles suggested that Berry wanted to reassert some form of influence as Michael's life began to unravel in the 1,990 seconds during the allegations, the media attacks, the financial battles. It was said that Berry felt entitled to claim Michael as a Motown creation, even though the man Michael became was shaped largely outside Berry's direct control. Diana Ross, one of the only people who truly understood both men, once told a close friend, "There are things between Berry and Michael that will never be spoken." It was less a statement and more a locked door. Then came 2003, the year everything twisted again. When Michael faced another wave of allegations and a new legal nightmare, something unusual reportedly happened. Berry Gordy appeared at Sony's New York offices for what some described as an emergency meeting. No one ever clearly explained why he was there. He wasn't Michael's manager. He wasn't his lawyer. He had no official corporate role in that crisis. And yet, there he was, walking into those halls at one of the most critical points in Michael's career, as if he still belonged in those rooms where decisions about Michael were being weighed. Fans still debate that moment. Why was he there? Who called him? What did he know? And the biggest question, whose interests did he represent when he walked through those doors? Some Motown historians and insiders suggest that Berry didn't want Michael to implode in public, not out of simple compassion, but because Michael was a core part of Berry's own legacy. If Michael went down too hard, so did the myth of a pristine Motown history. Others put forward a more unsettling theory, that Berry's presence meant the old guard was watching quietly, carefully, to make sure certain truths, contracts, or histories never spilled out in a way that threatened a much larger structure than one man. But nothing about Berry's role in Michael's life felt more chilling to fans than his demeanor at the memorial in July 2009. While the world shook with grief, celebrities crying openly, fans sobbing in the stands, Berry Gordy stepped up to the podium and delivered his eulogy with a calm composure that many described as almost eerie. His voice didn't crack. His eyes didn't seem to brim. The speech sounded polished, as if it were something he had rehearsed long before anyone knew when he would have to say it. Some viewers said he looked peaceful, even proud, as he declared, "Michael, the greatest entertainer that ever lived. Not my greatest student, not my favorite discovery, just a final label. Clean, detached, final." People couldn't decide whether it was the highest form of respect or a kind of closure that felt strangely cold, like closing a file instead of mourning a friend. The truth is, Barry's relationship with Michael has always looked like a maze built from pride, resentment, protection, and unbroken silence. They shared burdens the public rarely understood. The pressure of being black pioneers in a white-controlled industry, the trauma of fame arriving while they were still children, the knowledge of how the system really worked behind the glossy album covers. Barry knew the machinery behind Michael from day one, the handlers, the contracts, the men in expensive suits who owned the masters even when they didn't own the voice. And Michael learned Barry's power long before he understood his own. That is why, even years after Michael's death, Barry remains one of the most enigmatic figures in the story. Not because of what he openly did, but because of what he never clearly addressed. He never explained the full pressure around Motown 25. He never explained why he walked into Sony during Michael's darkest legal moment. He never explained why his eulogy sounded so composed, so settled. He never commented on why Diana Ross believed there were things between them that would never be spoken aloud. Berry Gordy laid the foundation for Michael Jackson's career. But foundations are heavy. They support, they shape, they also weigh down. Sometimes they crack the structure they were built to protect. In the final telling of Michael's life, Barry doesn't fit neatly into the role of villain or hero. He stands instead as a carved figure in the stone of Michael's past, too important to erase, too complicated to celebrate without question, too silent to ever fully understand. The godfather of the Jackson legacy, but also the man whose systems, expectations, and quiet power became a shadow Michael carried even after he walked away from Motown. For some fans, that shadow never really lifted, not in the years of superstardom, not in the years of scandal, and not even after the Hearst doors closed. 5 names. 5 shadows that moved around Michael Jackson like silent storms. A producer who, it was said, knew too much. An executive who, some believed, wanted everything. A brother who walked ahead of the official truth. A sister who carried 9 sealed bags into the night. And a godfather whose silence weighed more than any confession. People often repeat that Michael Jackson died alone. But that isn't the story these files suggest. He did not die alone. He died surrounded. Surrounded by people who needed him, drained him, watched him, negotiated him, doubted him, pushed him. Surrounded by the empire he built and the hands waiting to claim its pieces when he finally fell. Behind the glitter, the single glove, and the deafening cheers, Michael lived inside a maze of power plays, old debts, family wars, buried secrets, unspoken loyalties, and boardroom battles he never wanted but could never escape. He danced for the world, but he lived in fear. He healed millions. But no one fully healed him. In the end, the man who gave everything seemed to have nothing left but warnings. Warnings whispered in the dark to the one person he still trusted completely. Diana. Remember their names. He sensed the storm was coming. He felt it. He spoke about it. And when it finally hit him on that June morning in 2009, the world saw only the collapse, not the 5 shadows standing behind it. Now that the files have been opened, now that the masks have slipped, now that every whisper has been dragged into the light, one question still hangs